Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome back to my channel. Our today's topic is control systems in our body from FSC part 2, and in the second half of the video we'll also discuss the mechanism of the regulation of salt balance in the body, which is called as tonicity. Please guys, first subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Now let's start with the lecture.
Every organism, either it's unicellular or multicellular, has special regulatory mechanism by nature in their bodies, which are called as control systems. For example, the outside temperature is 45 degrees centigrade, or organism body cannot cope with such high temperature. For example, human body has normal temperature range of 37 degrees centigrade. So if outside temperature is 45 degrees centigrade, what happens that this hot temperature is sensed by the nerve endings present in our skin, and as a result they send the message to the control center of our body, which regulates the production of sweat by our sweat glands. And when the sweat is produced by our body, evaporation occurs, and by the evaporation cooling happens and our temperature gets normalized. So the credit goes to the control system present in our body. And similarly, the organisms which live in the environment where there is abundance of water, for example, the organisms living in freshwater environment, freshwater fishes, etc., they secrete diluted urine. Their urine contains large amount of water and less amount of salts, just because if high amount of water will enter into their cells will become turgid, and as a result of this turgidity the cells may burst and they prove fatal to the organism. In the same way, the organisms living in dry conditions, having less supply of water, they have more salts in their body and less water, so their reabsorption rate of water is very high, so they secrete concentrated urine. Their urine contains high amount of solute and less amount of water, so that they can restore their water in their body for a longer period of time. This is also the mechanism of control system of the body. Likewise, the control systems among intracellular and extracellular internal environment of an organism also at the cell level keep fluctuating in a narrow range in intracellular within the membrane as compared to in the extracellular, vascular and other interstitial fluid environment. It says that if the outside environment changes, inside environment of an organism also changes with the fluctuations of the outside environment, because an organism's body has to cope with the external environment, it has to survive in the given environment, so it undergoes changes in its internal environment also. Here, in addition to the solute and water, various essential metabolites, hormones, etc. are kept in a required range. Homeostasis does not mean to keep a fixed internal environment, as changes maintained within a specific range are necessary for normal body functions. So changes are performed by the organism as a result of homeostasis. For example, water availability may fluctuate tremendously for the organisms in the external environment, from abundant water supply, as I have told you the example of the freshwater environment organisms, to almost dry conditions. However, the quantity of water in the body, that is internal environment, may vary in response to the abundant supply. As I have told you that in the abundant supply of water the organisms secrete diluted urine, and in the dry conditions the organisms secrete concentrated urine, but in a narrow range. Narrow range means to normalize its internal environment. The control systems would not let the body flooded with water in abundant supply of water, and also not to dehydrate in the dry conditions. Furthermore, adaptation to lower level range in the dry conditions to higher level of the range in the abundant supply of water is good for an organism to feel normal within internal fluctuations forced by drastic external fluctuations. So the control systems help the body of the organism to cope with either the high abundance water condition and even to cope with the dry conditions. Now here comes the mechanism of action of the control system. This question is very important for the extensive question point of view in your board. So if this question comes as a long question in your board, you have to write from here that what is the mechanism of action of a control system, how a control system works. As we have a physical control system, as you have seen an inverter AC, if the outside environment is very hot, so this hot environment is sensed by the inverter AC once you on it. So the message is sent to the control system of that AC, for instance, by the temperature sensor. The message is conveyed to the control center, and the control center turns on its cooling system, and as a result the room gets cool because the cooling center sent the message to the effector, and the effector promoted the cooling effect. Similarly, our living systems also have the control system containing three components: receptor, control center, and effector. The control systems have been acquired for a variety of homeostatic regulations. These living control systems work exactly on the mechanism of physical control systems, as I have given you the example of an inverter AC. It has three components: receptor, control center, and effector. Now there is the same example of the physical control system, that in a physical control system, for example temperature control system, there is a sensor, that is thermometer, that monitors the temperature change from a set point. In your mind you should keep an example of inverter AC, which is a physical control system. It sends signals to the control center. Once the thermometer senses the temperature, it sends the message to the control center to take action by switching on the heater or control units in response to the drop and rise in temperature as compared to the set point. What happens in an inverter AC, that if the outside temperature is hot, the inside temperature will be cold as the control center sends response to the effector, and effector causes cooling. Similarly, if the outside temperature is very cold, then the signals are sent to the control center, and the control center produce the effect, which is that the internal temperature of the room will stay warm, okay, in response to the cold outside temperature. This is the mechanism of the physical control system. So what happens with the living control system? We also have a receptor, control center, and effector. Same example comes here, that if the outside temperature is very hot, our sweat glands will be activated in response to the signals transmitted by the nerve ending the foreskin to our brain. So our sweat glands will be activated, more sweat production will happen, and with the sweat production there will be evaporation, which causes cooling, and our temperature is normalized. Similarly, if the outside environment is very cold, it will lead to the sensation by the nerve endings of our skin, and it will create the goosebumps, and goosebumps will be the insulating layer of our skin that provides protection to us from the cold external environment. Similar to it, in living systems there is a set point and temperature regulated endothermic animals. Endothermic animals are those animals which produce their own metabolic heat. Write the definition of the on your books also. Endothermic animals are those animals which produce their own metabolic heat, or they maintain their own internal temperature despite of the external fluctuations. The receptor sensor detects the temperature change, for example increase, and sends the signal to the control center for action of cooling systems and vice versa. What is the feedback mechanism? Write a simple definition of feedback mechanism first on your books. That feedback mechanism is the mechanism in which the output of a system regulates a system. For example, the outcome or product of a system is produced, and when enough of the product is produced, then it will send the signals to the stimulus, and the stimulus will be decreased, which is the negative feedback mechanism, that the product is inhibiting the more production of the product. And if the product is less, then this less product will again send the message to the stimulus that to increase the production of the more product because more product is needed by the body. This is positive feedback mechanism. Let us study this. What is feedback mechanism? Detection of the change and signaling effective response to the control system is called as feedback mechanism. For example, our skin detects the temperature change and signaling occurs to the control center, and control center produces effect, which is the effector's response. It is also the feedback mechanism. In this process, there is an inverse effector's response. Inverse effector's response includes the negative feedback mechanism, in which the product of a reaction inhibits the further production of the product by sending the signals to the stimulus. Stimulus is the initial signal. In this process, there is an inverse effector's response to the change in the external environment, as there is generally a cooling effector's response to the warmth sensing of the external environment. Then again, keep the example of the production of sweat and evaporative effect, which causes cooling. Thus, they are termed as negative feedback. Once the temperature is normalized, now no more sweat will be produced. Okay? Which will be the negative feedback mechanism. This is the diagram. The outside is the external environment, where the environment is fluctuating, either it's very hot or very cold. And this box of yellow color you can see, this is the organism's internal environment, and inside there are two cells present. One is the single cell that is shown, and one is with the proper control system shown. This is the cell. Inside the cell, we can call it an intracellular environment. On the outside of the cell environment, which is extracellular environment, there are very narrow fluctuations, like if only a single change will occur, or intracellular environment can sense it very easily. This is the receptor. When the outside conditions change, or like very less fluctuations even occur, these are sensed by the control systems, and the control systems regulate the internal environment, whether the pH is very like fluctuating or the temperature is fluctuating. It is sensed by the control system to produce the effector's response. Now next is osmoregulation. Osmoregulation, I have already told you that the maintenance of solute and solvent concentration in the body. Water is the solvent of the solutes in the cell. As you know that water is the major solvent. Each cell has been adapted to a defined quantity of water in relation to the salt to perform its function. Every organism needs to maintain a water and salt balance in the body. Homeostatic mechanisms generally maintain its concentration. Now next is the concept of the tonicity, which is the study of the salt balance in the cell. The study of salt balance in the cell is called as tonicity. How the organisms balance the water and solutes in the body. This is very simple topic. You have already studied it in metric. Cells consistently encounter the changing extracellular environment. First one is hypotonic environment. Hypotonic environment is that environment in which there is more concentration of solvent in the outside environment. The diluted solution as compared to the cell environment is designated as hypotonic environment. It means that the extracellular environment has more water than that of the intracellular environment. Intracellular environment has more concentration of salts and less concentration of water. The hypotonic environment osmotically causes the entry of water into the cell and renders the cell solution to be diluted. Once the cell is placed in the hypotonic environment, more water will enter into the cell, and as a result the cell can become turgid. It may burst in the case of animal cell, and it can be harmed. Next one is hypertonic environment, which means that there are more concentration of salts in the extracellular environment. The more concentrated external environment is termed as hypertonic environment. It means that inside the cell the water is more, and outside the cell the water is less and salts are more. As a result, the water will be released from the cell and move into the outside environment, and as a result the cell shrinks. The hypertonic environment, on the other hand, renders the cell solution concentrated and shrinks the cell due to the loss of water. To prevent these situations, the cells osmoregulate themselves to keep water and salts balance in plants and animals. To prevent the shrinkage of the cell, the osmoregulation process occurs in the bodies of the plants and animals to survive with the changing environmental conditions. Here you can see the diagram that what happens when a cell is placed in a hypotonic environment. It becomes turgid as water enters into the cell. In an isotonic environment, there is a normal cell. The same quantity of water is entering into the cell and same quantity of water is being released. So there will be no change in the shape of the cell. Last one is hypertonic environment, in which the water present in the cell is released in the outside environment. As a result, the cell is shrunken. So this condition is also very fatal to the cell. So this was all about our today's lecture. You have to learn it properly from the book. We have studied from the last paragraph of page number 1 to the starting paragraph of page number 3 before osmoregulation in plants. You have to learn it properly and stay blessed, and Allah Hafiz.